Hi, welcome back. Ross Ford with the Home Builders Association of Utah. And we're going to run through the quick podcast for what has happened with the bills of the session through this past week. So we're looking at everything that's had a significant change or some sort of action during the past week. Not every bill. So we'll see how it goes. So to start with, we're going to look at HB 48. It's the wildland interface modification. The bill moved through committee, and that's great. The thing that was interesting to me about this bill, and maybe even a little bit frustrating, is the purpose of this bill was to generate standard map that was focused more on insurance companies. That right now every insurance company has their own methodology for risk management when it comes to wildfires. And because of everything that's going on, and obviously that's a big deal and something they're looking at. The problem is it makes what insurance is going to be and how it works and how we deal with it unpredictable. Not really our issue as builders. However, it really catches our attention when they start messing with the wildland urban interface map, which this does. So it would define areas of what that would be. I went and got with the Department of Forestry to look at the map so we could see what it does. And they were able to show me the map in detail of what it does, how it works. It's interactive. They've done a good job. It's a remarkable map. Ton of work has gone into it. It will be very helpful to use. And I think it works really well for us. But we looked at a couple of sample areas. I couldn't look at the whole map. And the whole idea was I would be able to get that map and spend some time and really look at it. The problem is part of what this bill does is it makes that map public. So right now we're kind of going through voting on a bill, and for us in generally we're saying we support it because we support the concept, but we're not allowed to see that detail or at least have it in our possession so we can spend time. They will show it to us if we go and deal with their tech guy to see it, but it's not out there public. So again, it's not hidden, but it's very difficult to look at and see. It's moving forward. We'll see where it goes. It has all kinds of insurance. It seems like a good idea, implications in it, not our fight. So we'll see what happens with it. Next one is HB 58, Building Inspector Amendments. And we've talked about this one at length. The only kind of significant thing happened this week, and it hasn't really happened yet, is I had the opportunity to meet with the bill sponsor earlier today and got an idea from someone else. I wish it was my idea because it's a pretty creative idea. But the concern building officials have had is that this will be a complaint-driven process when it comes to the report card of each building department. So DOPL is who will oversee how that's reported and how we ultimately decide whether the building department did a good job or a bad job. For the most part, DOPL is a complaint-driven department, and so it stands to reason that what will generate that report are the complaints. And so the building officials are rightly concerned that obviously they will get a fairly poor rating if the only thing that goes into the report is the complaints. And some of those complaints may not be valid. There's all kinds of reasons to worry about that. We also would like more data going in, not less, because if we only have one or two data points on a particular city, it's easy to say, well, that's the contractor that just didn't get along with the city, which may or may not be true. If we have a city and we have 70 contractors, then that becomes a data point that can't be ignored. So the idea was to get more people. So the suggestion was that they put some sort of a QR code that's available in every interaction that you have with the city. So when you get your building permit, there's a QR code somewhere on it. When you get an inspection, you're given a QR code. And all you have to do is scan it, and it will take you to the state's website where they're collecting this data. Nothing will be required, but hopefully it will encourage a little bit more interaction and maybe we can get better data points. Okay, the next one is HB 114. Again, fun bill, has stirred up a lot of emotion. This is the one that deals with the architects. So just a quick summary, the architects a long, long time ago, and in most of the states around the country, have gone in and legally protected the word architect. So that if I just sit down and draw a set of plans and sell them to somebody and say, here, build this house, I can't claim I'm an architect. An architect's been given a lot of schooling and a lot of expertise, and they are different than someone who just drafts up the plans. They're also a lot more expensive, Sometimes you need them, sometimes you don't. Because they protected the term, they have used it to say you can't even use the word architectural or architecture, that they took any derivative of that word architect and let it be protected, which has become problematic. And a lot of the different designers and even us with paraded magazines and stuff are saying, but this is what the public understands. They understand what that word means. We don't want to give anybody the designation of architect if they're not, but we need to be able to describe their work in a way that is understood by the public. The architects push back really, really hard. The bill sponsor has spent a fair amount of time with them, and apparently everybody's happy with it. It goes to committee, I believe tomorrow, but I know it's the next day or two it will go into committee. I suspect there may be an individual or two who are complaining, but the architects, as far as an overall body, any kind of an association or everything, I think they're neutral on it and we'll let it go. So I assume it will move forward. Housing construction amendments, HB 175, which was Representative Ward's bill. It moves 3-plex and 4-plexes from the International Building Code to the International Residential Code. So it treats them as just a residential. The IBC sets a higher standard to be able to deal with big public groups. So you have to have different kinds of egress, a variety of different things. You have to have different kinds of fire suppression. There is some benefit to saying we're going to build more like a residential home, and it's a belief by most people that to go to a 3-plex or a 4-plex, so long as it doesn't exceed 2 stories. So you can do 2 duplexes basically pushed together. Right now the IRC allows for 1. And so you could have 2 duplexes on 1 lot, but it has to be a bigger lot. If we bring them together to a 4-plex, it can go onto a smaller lot. This would allow for it. Everybody seems to have agreed to what that language needs to look like, what we can do to keep it safe, and I believe it's moving forward pretty easy. So the next one is HB 214. It's employer verification. This is one that sparked a lot of passion, I guess, on both sides. Some that are saying, no, this is what we've got to do. Some saying, how dare you even think to do this? This is one that would require an employer. Over 150 people have had to e-verify for quite a number of years. This would reduce the number of 150 down to 5. So it would loop in most of our business in there, because somehow it would also get subcontractors. Anyway, it would just put a much higher burden to say, well, we have to go through e-verify and prove that people are legally here. The problem with that is the reason this bill got brought forward is it's Representative Walter out of southern Utah, and he had one of his constituents come to him and say, look, we're really struggling because, and I believe it was a subcontractor, not a general contractor, but either way, it doesn't make any difference. They were saying they were struggling because the competitors out there were hiring people illegal. They weren't paying any insurance. They didn't have any of the workers' comp. They didn't do any of the payroll deductions. They just paid them cash at the end of the day or the end of the week or however it was set up with them. But they were all completely illegal. And so this other person came to him and says, look, we can't possibly bid against them because they hire illegal people. They pay them illegally. And so their actual burden, their labor burden, what they have to spend just to keep business running and meet regulatory requirements is so much less they can undercut our bid and we can't compete. So this is one possible approach to correct that. The problem is these people that are already hiring illegal, if we say, okay, we're going to increase the burden to check on your employees, everybody who's doing it legal, including this guy who's looking for a fix, now has one more thing to do every time they hire someone. One more thing to track and one more government regulation to be responsible for. But the guys who are running illegal, they're already running illegal. They're not going to do e-verify because they're not hiring through any legal process that would trigger that e-verify. So it hasn't helped solve the problem. It may help with the businesses that are doing it right to say, okay, well, let's start weeding out the illegal people and get it to how it should be. But it doesn't get at the problem he has. The other thing is if we're going to go down this road, and there's an argument to do that, to say, well, we need to start figuring out how to get people legal or get the ones that are illegal out, whatever we need to do that. We've had, 30, 40 years of the regulatory agencies kind of turning a blind eye to certain groups of illegals that come here for work reasons. And they, for the most part, just get a pass and they stay here. And so it's become a pattern with a lot of different things. Again, in construction, in our industry, I still see a lot of people that actually do e-verify because they think it's a good thing. But there are some out there that are illegal. Especially over the last 4 years, though, we've had an administration that hasn't just invited them in, but has encouraged tens of millions of illegals to come in and go to work. And they have come and set up these businesses, and now we have businesses operating around what was encouraged just a year ago. And we're going to come in and say, okay, we're going to pull those out. There needs to be some sort of a phase out for those who have done it wrong to say, okay, how do we fix this? Because at the time, it didn't feel like it was wrong. It didn't feel like they were doing something wrong. So again, it's not a bad idea. We just have to figure out how to do it slower. But we still have the other problem of what do we do about the companies that are running illegal? And to add additional burden to those who are doing it right does not solve that problem. Next one, House Bill 295, where it's Representative Cutler. And this was a bill that, in short, gave lien rights to cities for if you didn't pay your fees. And what they were getting at is that there are certain utilities that a city is responsible for, and they don't have any leverage to get people to pay. If you don't pay your water bill, they can turn your water off. They can't turn off the sewer system. They can't turn off stormwater. So that's what he claimed he was trying to get at, and I believe that's what he was trying to get at. That's his concern, is how do we get those people to pay those bills? The problem is the bill was written so broadly that it could have covered anything. It could have covered if you got a reinspection fee and you felt it was unjustified and you wanted to dispute it and have that fight. It would be very hard to have the fight because they could just throw a lien against your property. I don't think that's what it was intended to do. Ultimately, after a fairly productive meeting with him last week, he agreed to narrow it to just stormwater and sewer. That solves our problem, and we're happy with it. Problem is we don't know where the cities are right now. The cities obviously wanted it to have that tool that they could use on a much broader basis. So at this point, they're looking at it. We'll see what they say, whether or not it moves forward as a consensus bill or what. So House Bill 327 is a homeowners association modification bill. It's usually we don't get involved in homeowner association fights just because generally those battles, what that concern is with the homeowners association usually happens after our part of it is complete. Now there is some point where if you're a bigger developer, you're still the declarant, and you do have control over it. And so we have to be careful that that doesn't mess up the final phase of a project, because as the homeowner association forms and you switch it over to that group, they could make it really hard for the builder to build out the last few units. So we watch it for that. So they show up on our radar and we look at them. This isn't one that really affects that. It is from just a million complaints, and any of you that are in a homeowners association already know what I'm talking about, but you have neighbors that say, I hate the kind of car they're driving and they park it funny on their driveway, or it's loud, or they fly a particular flag I don't like, or they put in a political sign that I disagree with. Things like that. They're saying this is ridiculous. The homeowners association can't be so nitpicky on things like that. We have to strip some of that authority, because they also back it up with pretty stiff fines in some places. So they strip that out. For us, the reason it's super interesting is it also takes out the ability for a homeowners association to restrict fire-resistant exterior materials. So especially again, in light of everything that's gone on in California, the idea that a homeowner would come in and say, I would like to put a fire-resistant siding on my home, and the homeowners association say, no, we only allow real wood, is not necessarily the smartest idea, especially when we have fire-resistant sidings that look pretty doggone close to real wood. So this one has our interest because It would make some of our building processes different. The bill did go to committee. It's gone through its first committee hearing and public hearing, and it went through without any problem. It became kind of a point of discussion about the fire-resistant material, and it's hard for someone to argue that they're going to put into a policy to require you to put real wood on, especially if you're in one of these high-risk areas when there are other options. So it's moving forward. Okay, next one is House Bill 355. It's critical infrastructure materials. For us common folk, that means a gravel pit. There's kind of an ongoing contention with gravel pits. It's been legislative action for, gosh, I don't know, at least the last 5 years. They're constantly talking about what we do. The reason there's contention is because we need gravel. If we're going to build, everything we do requires gravel for the aggregate and cement. We use it on every house, every structure. Problem is the cities don't particularly like them in their city. They don't want the trucks there. They don't want the noise and the dust of the gravel pit. So there's constantly trying to figure out, well, how do we do this? This bill deals with that, and it makes it so that a city can't zone a gravel pit out of existence. Current mining law says that if you go on, and it's probably easier to understand if you're thinking of gold or silver or something like that, and you find a vein of gold, you can follow that vein of gold until it plays out, till it's gone. It's not there. Well, I don't know how you do that on a gravel pit, especially on the Wasatch Front, where you come along the low hills, and it's all gravel. It's all sediment from Lake Bonneville. So you can't really play it out to the end of the mine. So this bill came in and said, well, what you can do is you can continue to mine any property that you own or control and is contiguous with where your current mine is. The problem was in some cities, they were coming in and putting zoning around where the gravel pit currently is. So they weren't able to move forward because they say, oh, no, it's not zoned for that. You can't go to the next phase of your gravel pit. And they were shutting them down. It was an interesting committee meeting. People complained about the trucks. That came up over and over and over. If we need gravel at the building site, the trucks coming through the city to get it to the building site, whether it comes from the east side of the city, bringing the gravel in from the pit that's up on the east side, or if it comes from the west side, where the gravel's coming from somewhere way out in Tooele or something like that, we're still bringing the trucks in. The further you get the gravel away from where we're using it, the more you run the trucks on the road. It's hard on the roads. Whatever that risk is of having the trucks increases with every mile you place. It's illogical to think that by moving it far away solves the trucking problem. The other one is the dust. Just that, every time the wind blows, we get a ton of dust, which I'm sure is true. The gravel pits, I believe, try and deal with the dust the best they can, but it's pretty hard with a gravel pit. It's also, I don't know of any gravel pits that are really, really new, that when they first went in, there were no houses around them. It shouldn't come as a surprise to people that they're living next to a gravel pit. It should have been fairly obvious when they bought their home or built their home. Doesn't mean they shouldn't try and mitigate the problem, but that was one of the issues. There were several people that thought the solution to this was we get all of our gravel out from Tooele, or even further away and bring it in on rail cars. It was kind of interesting to have a representative there from Tooele who's saying, well, I'm not sure I think that's the best idea, that they don't necessarily love the gravel pit any more than anybody else. And it's hard to justify, well, we're going to do all of the mining and everything that these citizens claimed they didn't like. We're going to do it in Tooele when the appetite for that product that they mine is on the Wasatch Front, bringing it back into town. So some of it just didn't make sense. Anyway, obviously contentious, a lot of emotion around it, and I understand why. It did pass through committee, so it's moving forward, and we'll see if the NIMBYs on the aggregates are able to get their way. It will definitely increase the cost. As you all know, most of the time, the cost of aggregates is in the shipping, not the actual material. So every time we move it a mile further away, it just pushes up the price. There's no way to get around it. So we'll keep watching that one. Next one, another fun one, House Bill 422. This is, again, Representative Walter from Southern Utah, and this is dealing with Rockville. In fact, I just call it the Rockville bill. I'm sure that's not the appropriate terminology, but it's done because of the little town of Rockville. And this is the one where Rockville didn't want to let a builder and a property owner, the owner of the home, they didn't want to allow them to have their home in the Parade of Homes. So way back in, I don't know, October, November, they went for a special use permit. The builder had worked really hard. He's a longtime builder. He's done multiple parades. He understands how a parade works and he knows what the problems are. So he'd worked really hard to solve those problems. What are the traffic issues going to be like? What is parking going to be like? We know what we have to deal with to make the parade work. And so he had dealt with that. He went in for a special use permit. The Planning Commission just went crazy and just ultimately said no. He moved the permit or the application forward to the city council, and then he decided to pull it back, and rather than it being part of the Parade of Homes, because that seemed to be a point of contention with him, it would just be an open house and let people come see it. So they sent him a very formal letter, which I've provided for you guys before, saying if you do that, it will be a criminal offense and you'll be getting fined $1,000 a day and up to 6 months in jail per day for the offense. For us in the building industry or any real estate industry, that is a pretty significant precedence to set, because everything we do with housing, it's not like we can take our housing to a retail outlet and say, okay, we're going to take it to commercial zone so everybody likes how it's done. We have to sell the house where the house is. It's the only way to do it. If Rockville was able to push this forward, it gives cities the ability to tell you when and how you're going to do any kind of open house. It gives someone else the authority to tell you what you're going to do to sell your home and how it works. So it's pretty problematic. The reason this has been contentious is we put this out there and there were people who says, well, then there has to be something wrong with the home. Or there's something wrong with the planning, and that's why the city's doing what they're doing. So I would encourage all of you, and I can go get the document and we can post it, but it's like 16 pages long. But anytime they have a city meeting, they keep minutes. We have the minutes. We know what was said and by who, and you can go through and look at it, and it's kind of shocking the things they worried about. They worried there wouldn't be enough parking. Again, the builder says, look, I've already put in place a field. I have a spot that we can set up for parking and it's going to work. I'd have to go through, I'm not sure I remember all of the things. They had looked at how many tickets were sold to the Parade of Homes and said, well, based on that, we could have that many people come through here. That's this many per day. That's more than we can handle. But the reality is never in the history of the parades, any of the parades in Utah, that as long as we've been tracking it, we've never seen a single time where every ticket holder attended any single house. Very few of them attend all of the houses, but we've never had all ticket holders go to any one house. So if you sell 10,000 tickets, you don't get 10,000 visitors to one house. So he just says it doesn't happen. Historically, if you're way out of town, then it doesn't happen. This house is all by itself in Rockville, so people are mostly going to be around the St. George area. Unless they have a reason, they're not going to go out there to this house. It's not a huge, huge home. It's a very nice home, but it's more just a standard, modest-sized home. It's not the draw that you're going, wow, I have to see this house. It's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. So anyway, a whole bunch of things. I would encourage you, first of all, if you think cities don't do this kind of stuff, you need to get a little bit more involved and see what happens. Unfortunately, you hand these people a fair amount of power. You shouldn't be surprised when they use that power. And that's what they're doing. The other thing that I would say would be the best thing to do, especially those of you that think, well, maybe there's a problem with the house, go to the parade. Go see the house. It would be worth your trip. Go see what it is and see what happens. You can see for yourself if this house presents some sort of a risk, or it's not up to standard, or it's a blight on the city, you can go see this, and you should. It would be worth your time. So I will make sure that we have linked on here where the city's website is. We will link you to that. Everybody should be aware this is what happens, and be very, very careful who you elect to those leadership positions. You need people that are going to do a good job and not have this power go to their head and use it to become little tyrants and pick on people just because they have the power. Okay, HB 470, the water heater emission amendments, was just my favorite bill ever because it says that it repeals the ultra low NOx water heaters, and really that's the whole bill. Obviously it's only a few words, but it has a significant impact. All the mining and petroleum, and gosh, I have to think of all of them, but all of them are very, very upset and will oppose this ferociously because it opens up the EPA's document that evaluates why we have gone into non-attainment, or in the process of going into non-attainment, meaning our pollution is too high. When that happens, or you get close to it, they say, what's your corrective action? How are you going to fix this? So they put together a plan and say, here are the things we're going to fix. By saying we're going to require everybody to have an ultra low NOx water heater, that checked that box. And so now the EPA is no longer looking at these other industries. And the fix to do something to a refinery or a mining operation or something like that would be enormous. The fix for the ultra low NOx water heater is also enormous, except it's enormous and it's shared by tens of thousands of individuals, so it doesn't seem as enormous. So their argument is, hey, leave it alone. Don't mess with this. It's too hard to get to where we have met the EPA's requirements. It's not worth it. Representative Ward, who's running it, he believes it is worth it. Maybe. He's still trying to collect more data. A lot of it is he files the bill and it brings everybody to the table and they start sharing all of the facts. And he's asking for more facts. In fact, if anybody has any information, please get a hold of me and let me know. We want to know things like, what's the failure rate on the ultra low NOx water heaters compared to other water heaters? What is the warranty on them? And how often is that warranty collected? There's anecdotal evidence that an ultra low NOx water heater doesn't have the same longevity as one of our regular water heaters. So they look at the cost to put it in and say, well, there is a small increase in cost compared to doing a regular water heater. But if its lifespan is significantly less, then that cost is a lot more than what has been factored into the discussion. He would like to gather all of those numbers and say, maybe this is worth it, maybe it's not. Maybe he'll look at all the numbers and say, no, we're going to leave it alone. He's not super passionate about saying, here's what we got to do, but he is super passionate about finding a way to reduce the housing costs. And he understands it's going to be a whole bunch of incremental little changes. And this would just be one of them. So we'll watch it. We'll see where it goes. It's obviously going to be met with huge pushback from fairly powerful people to say, no, we're not going to do that. The other one, and again, new bill for now, is HB 499. It's Department of Environmental Quality Amendments. In short, this bill goes through and fixes kind of how the board functions and just a variety of little changes within the operation of it. It becomes real interesting to us because it has a section in it that deals with asbestos. And right now we had a builder that got turned away at a landfill because he didn't have his asbestos inspection certification. So the landfill wouldn't allow him to dump the debris from the demo on a little construction site. I think he was doing a bathroom remodel or something. Anyway, they wouldn't allow him to dump it. Now, if you're a private individual, that's fine. Go dump all you want. It's only if you're a contractor. We took his story and we went and talked to the Division of Environmental Quality, and specifically the Division of Air Quality, and said, well, what's the deal? And they said, well, you have to have it inspected. However, understand you can't see asbestos, so the only way to check if it's asbestos or not is it has to be tested. So they say, no, we don't require a test on everything, but we do require an inspection. You can't know just visually, so you kind of end up testing everything. And it's for all homes. Anytime you disturb more than 3 square feet, you have to have the home tested even if it's a fairly new home. This particular builder works on homes that are less than 10 years old, and just little changes here and there. And in his particular case, it was thousands of dollars to get it tested and weeks in waiting time. So it ends up being his asbestos check increased his bid price by 40%, which is not okay. This bill goes through and says, no, we're going to reevaluate when you do asbestos. It's been outlawed by the EPA for a long time. Their bottom line is, when it was originally outlawed in the 70s, they stopped producing it. They stopped making that stuff with it. So there's virtually no asbestos in the construction, and it is an expense that has to be there. And so this bill will address making that so it doesn't apply to those newer homes. We're into Senate bills. We're almost done. Just a couple left. So SB 220, this is construction modification. Senator Musselman, stormwater bill. It's one that we've worked with him for a couple of years on. It did go through the committee, didn't have any negative comments, and it's been in process for a couple of years. It's been worked really hard. Not everybody's happy with it. In fact, a lot of people are unhappy with it, but they accept that there needs to be some changes, that something needs to change in the stormwater arena, that in a lot of cities, the stormwater has become its own department. It's turned into its own bureaucracy to deal with stormwater in a state that's a desert that a lot of times doesn't have any stormwater. And yet there's so much money being spent on it and so much effort being put into it. And a lot of it is more about the paperwork and the process, not the actual protection of the water. So anything that protects the water, we need to do. We need to look at it. Nothing in this bill lowers those thresholds, but it requires everybody to look at more efficient processes. It's moving along. I do hear some stormwater inspectors that are concerned with it. But for the most part, what I have heard is they're not concerned with the principle of what's happening, but they are concerned with the execution. Some of them are saying, well, we're not exactly sure how we're going to do this, which may be true. We may have to figure this out as we go. Hopefully everybody's on board to say, look, there are better ways to do this, and we're going to figure it out and do it. This bill particularly looped in Department of Environmental Quality. This time it's the Division of Water Quality, and said, look, you have to be on board with this as well. So it's not just the cities. Now it's put the state in the process as well, that they have to play along by these same rules. So I believe it's a good bill. We'll see where it goes. It seems to be moving along just fine. Again, as long as nobody's speaking against a bill like this, it should pass through without a problem. So last thing, there's some other Senate bills, but not a lot happened on them this last week. I believe more is going to happen this coming week, and just for a variety of reasons, scheduling, how they get moved into committees and when. That's just part of the game. But I had a meeting this morning, and it's from the Property Rights Coalition, put together a meeting this morning, and I went and sat in on it. And one of them, they had a variety of different legislators come speak, and one of them I thought was interesting for us was the Speaker of the House, Representative Mike Schultz. And he talked about not any specific bill, but in general, the House, the body, where they were going with kind of some of the things that were their big issues. What are we seeing happen this year? And it was interesting that he focused on education. There are a lot of education bills that are happening this year, and I think a lot of the educators, based on what I see at the Capitol, they're not bills we normally follow, so I don't know all of the details, but I see a lot of what I would describe as pretty unhappy people up there protesting and screaming about different things. So I'm assuming they're not happy about what it is. Interesting to hear from his perspective as he looks at the body and the bills and what they're trying to do, that over the last, 3 or 4 years, the education has been given year after year after year record increases in funding. Now, from what I hear from the education people, it's still not enough. It's still got to be more. It's never going to be enough. We've moved from almost dead last, second from the bottom of pupil funding per pupil, to up in the top, 3. We've come way up. They have changed what education is getting paid significantly. What they're doing now isn't so much the pay, is they're going in and saying, well, how does our education work? What is it doing? What works? What doesn't? What are the efficiencies? And where do we do it better? So like in higher education, there's one bill that would say you've got to bring it back to more what I would call a traditional education, more that, we're going to study philosophy, but instead of studying the philosophy of Black Lives Matter or that type of thing, we're going to study Plato, or we're going to study those traditional, long time ago philosophy things that would have come with higher ed 50 years ago. There are bills and efforts to say we have some courses that are very poorly attended and don't graduate anybody, and if they do graduate anybody, there's no job attached to the degree. We need to evaluate those, and putting pressures on the higher ed people to evaluate those, and we'll do away with them. It doesn't make sense. We'll reallocate those resources to the ones where they're really, really high demand. Go to UVU and look at nursing. It's hard to get into the program because there's just not enough room. There seems to be a demand for nurses, and there seems to be an appetite to take the nursing program, but there's not the capacity within the nursing program to take more. And there's a lot of different programs like that. So they're trying to say, we need to be smarter about where we put the resources and how we do this, which seems to make sense. Anyway, so that's on the higher ed. Public ed, and I don't have a lot of detail on this other than they're just putting a bigger push on CTE, which is career and technical education. So kind of anything you do with your hands, certainly our field, and say we need more of that back into the high schools. We've lost shops. A lot of those programs have gone by the wayside, and they're saying we need to bring those back into the high schools. President Adams, the Senate president, he talked, and the drum he's pounding hard this year, and for good reason, is that last year this Utah Supreme Court made a ruling that changed how ballot initiatives were looked at, and said that the legislature couldn't reverse or alter a ballot initiative. And that has caused President Adams a lot of concern. And he's trying to figure out what to do with it. Because the problem is if you can't do anything with a ballot initiative other than accept it, then you can have, and we've seen in other states, California, Oregon, just to name some in our area, where you have people with less than pure motives come into your state with huge amounts of money and leverage it to pass a ballot initiative to do things like, in Oregon, they made pretty much any drug you can imagine almost without recourse. It's like a $45 fine that can be waived if you take a course. And so they have these really hard drugs that are just openly used, and it's playing havoc on the state. If the legislator could go in and say, well, okay, some of this makes sense. Medical marijuana is a good example for us. Recreational marijuana, everybody says, no, we're not really in favor of that. But that's what the ballot initiative said. But if we say, okay, well, let's change it. Medical marijuana seems to have some value, that as a medicine, it's a valuable tool. But you need to have not a really, really wealthy marijuana lobby group be able to say, no, here's what we're going to do. And it applies to all kinds of things. Anyway, so that's what President Adams is worried about. There is a resolution going through this, and I believe it's just in the Senate now, that will address this and try and start the constitutional amendment to consider changing that constitutionally, because that's the only way you can undo the Supreme Court's decision, is they're looking, because their decision's based on the Constitution, and they're saying based on the Constitution, this is what it is. But it quickly moves to, instead of a representative republic, a democracy, and a pure democracy is very different than the form of government we were created with. We want to have representatives that put that time and the study into it. It was said once that a democracy, a pure democracy, is two wolves and a lamb deciding what they'll have for dinner. It doesn't usually work with just mob rule. We have to have something different. Anyway, So those are kind of the two issues I picked up from those two gentlemen today, which are interesting points, which do touch into our world a little bit. With that, thank you, and we will be back next week. And a pure democracy is